Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's a College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We're glad to have you with us. The teams that shifted conferences this year are entering conference play. We thought it would be a good moment to take stock of those new powers among them, focusing on those that appear to have risen to the occasion or maybe about to get seriously tested. But before we dive in, let me remind you can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show, where we have video highlights of the show, run polls, and listen to your feedback. Take a moment if you can to like, rate, and subscribe to us. We always appreciate that. So jumping into what's going on, obviously, all the shifts happened in the offseason that finally were going to occur. The P5 coalesced into the P4, and many of these teams are about to finally enter conference play. Like UCLA started a week early and got bludgeoned by Indiana. Texas starts another week from now, but basically the majority of them are starting this week. I mean, we could talk about the unexpected or the expected, seeing a 3-0 run as domineering Cal heads into Tallahassee. But no, we'll save that. We'll see where Cal goes with all of this. But this is an opportunity to talk about that. Sean, how are you doing? What are your thoughts kind of going into this?
Well, I'm doing great, as always. I will say, my mind was blown today when it turns out that Adrian Wojnarowski is retiring from ESPN. That was one of the craziest notifications I've ever gotten on my phone. So I feel like
the final Woj bomb. That's what people Woj bomb. That's what people were joking about. Yeah,
I did chuckle because ESPN put up a story announcing he's joining St. Bonaventure, his alma mater, to run their basketball program, essentially. But they triple bylined the story with the Jeff Passan, Adam Schefter, and Pete Thamel, and I'm like, this is like I described it on Twitter as the 21 gun salute of news breaking, and that's just what it felt like to me. Anyway, to move more into this is a fascinating weekend. I think that this is kind of like the rubber meets the road weekend in so many ways, because new college football kind of starts this weekend. We had a couple of conference games start earlier than that, but this is the first big one. USC versus Michigan, of course. We've had that game circled for a long time. Tennessee versus Oklahoma, huge circle game. And the timing of this is fascinating, too, because Texas just became number one in the country for the first time since 2008. So a great time, I think, to talk about kind of the future of college football right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been interesting to see the fact that, initially Oregon looked a little shaky. We'll get to that. And now here they are kind of seeming to right themselves as they get ready to kind of enter they're on a bye this week, but when they eventually start their league play. Should we start with Texas then? If we're going to take stock, obviously the number one team in the land, they don't really, ULM is this kind of their last real kind of play game before they start, with Mississippi State. So they have probably, we talked about this before the season, of the two SEC editions, they have more of a gradual ease into getting ready for conference play when they play the Cotton Bowl is their first real challenge, it seems like. But so far, what do we think about them? I mean, it looks like Texas. I mean, I almost did the cliche that Texas is back, but truly, I mean, Texas is back to the top. Texas has, especially with Georgia's performance against Kentucky, proved that it can do what it needs to do and certainly assert itself. Now, granted, we are in a situation where I still think it's early season. What if USC blows out Michigan and suddenly we're like, well, maybe Michigan just wasn't that tough of a team? I mean, no, game day went there. I know it was all the excitement, but what do you think? I mean, is Texas deserving of the number one right now? And are they the best prepared to be in their new conference?
Well, I would still have Georgia number one, but they're very deserving of being number one, most definitely, after what they did on the road at Michigan. I'm still a little on the fence about how good Michigan actually is, but they showed the indicators that I needed to see to take them seriously as a national championship team, specifically in the passing game, right? Playing well in the red zone, creating stuff against tight windows. So I think that they are very deserving of being the number one team in the country. And I want to turn back the clock just for a second to when the announcement was made that Texas and Oklahoma were joining the SEC, because I'll tell you what, Texas was about to embark on a 5-7 season. They were one of the worst. This is one of the worst teams that they had ever had. So huge testament to Steve Sarkisian for staying true to his process, and eventually kind of building up the program that he wanted to build. In so many ways, this is a program built in the image of Alabama and Nick Saban and the way that they do things. Now, I do think we also have to give a little credit to kind of the changes in college football and NIL and the way that they're able to leverage it, but no other major program has kind of leveraged it the same way that Texas has to this point. So I think that it's a huge testament to this program that they're at this point. Like you said, we're not necessarily going to know a whole lot about Texas as a on the high end. You can say Red River, and we're going to learn some stuff in that game, depending on how good Oklahoma is. But I think it's really that next week game against Georgia. Texas Georgia is going to be one of the biggest games of easily the biggest of the year. I mean, last year, you're talking Ohio State, Michigan is, I guess, that kind of game. This might be as big or even bigger than that in some ways. So, I mean, it's such a credit that they've been able to build themselves up to this point. Now, of course, they're going to be playing at least for the next week with a backup quarterback, but that backup quarterback is in fact a Manning. This is also, by the way, one of the more fun situations in one of the more fun matchups, because, by the way, it's Arch Manning versus General Booty, who's the starter at Louisiana Monroe. So it's going to be a fun game one way or another.
It's so funny because I was thinking, I'm like, when's the last time there was a quarterback who was potentially a Heisman favorite, or actually not even a Heisman favorite, but who had stepped up and kept the starting position, but everyone was talking about the backup. There might have been others, but the one that, ironically, considering who they're playing, is when Matt Leinart won the position at USC. There was like a quarterback competition. Matt Castle, who obviously went on to play in the NFL, was there, and he just stayed a backup because he'd been a backup to two Heisman quarterbacks, as it turned out. But the real talk was John David Booty. They had got this kid to enroll early when that was still a novelty at the time. People were like, "You can just do that," because there had been some argument between his parents and the school, and they were all administrators, so they left the school in a huff and found out they had enough credits where he could enroll. And I'm like, ironically, also a Booty. I don't think they're related. I don't think General Booty and John David Booty are related. Are they? I don't know.
I think they are.
Really?
They are. Yeah.
I remember he was from Louisiana. I remember John David Booty was from Louisiana at the time. But and yeah, what am I saying?
He's John David Booty's nephew.
Oh my goodness, I feel old. Oh my goodness, I feel old. I was waiting for you to say cousin.
No. Do you understand how long ago it was that John David Booty enrolled at USC? That we're talking
like 5 years ago. That's how you start to think when you get my age, okay? That's how you start to think. And then somebody says, oh my goodness. Woo! All right. Well, that was, gosh, I'm sober now. Not that I wasn't before, but I mean, I am. The sobering reality has now a podcast over me.
Well, and I do think to throw one more out there, right? It is the Tim Tebow, Chris Leak situation in 2006.
Absolutely.
That would be another one.
The Tim Tebow hype, if people weren't around for that before he even played, I was like, this guy's got to be this. There's no way this guy could be as good as he is. I remember thinking that, especially Chris Leak was his own story. I remember he made a promise that he was not going to date anybody until they won a national championship at Florida. And I'm like, good luck there, kid. And then I was wondering, did anyone ever follow up on him on that after they actually did? But anyway, that's a side note. But this is absolutely the Arch Manning story is going to get its wonderful chapter this week, and luckily against ULM.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And again, I just want to, when this all happened, all of these programs that we're going to talk about, right? We're going to talk about 5 programs that ultimately made the transition to new conferences. All of them have been kind of working behind the scenes, building up the infrastructure in order to prepare themselves for this moment. I would make the case that Texas, out of all of the programs that change conferences, has prepared themselves number one, that they are the ones who have prepared themselves better than anybody else for this moment.
I agree. It's hard to argue that. And we'll get to another team we thought was a contender, but I'm more curious about them after the first few weeks. But first, the real game, one of the best games of the weekend, Utah at Oklahoma State, ranked versus ranked. This is going to be a real separation game for the Big 12, but also this is the real test of Utah as a team. Most people, even though they're brand new to the conference, were picking them to potentially win the whole thing. What do we make of this game? I mean, there are concerns. Obviously, the Cam Rising injury has been something we've discussed. Oklahoma State has seemed like they usually are earlier in the season. Like you're kind of curious what to even make of them. How do you see this game shaping up?
Yeah, this is a huge game. We talked about Kansas State, Arizona a little bit last week, as it wasn't a conference game, but in some ways it was like an elimination game for being one of these top contenders coming in. Well, Oklahoma State, Utah, I think is right there. If Utah comes out of this game, I think that they are the favorite once again in the Big 12, especially if Cameron Rising looks pretty healthy and back to normal. And he is supposed to play in this game on the road at Oklahoma State, by the way. And on the other side, I mean, you do have an Oklahoma State team that played in the Big 12 title game last year. And I'll tell you what, their fans are very much like, why are we not getting more respect when it comes to being a legitimate Big 12 contender? We were just right there. We were picked really high in the conference standings. Why are we not being considered with the Utahs and the Kansas States of the world?
Could I just say the ultimate disrespect if I'm an Oklahoma State fan is it seems like a more even match, and yet Oklahoma, because they're Oklahoma in the SEC, they got game day. All I can think of is that ad to really kind of get them a little bit, just the little brother mentality. That will do it. That will absolutely do it.
And I'll tell you what, I mean, we'll talk about that Oklahoma Tennessee game a little later in the show, and I'm a little concerned about how that game is going to go for the Sooners. This is a big opportunity for Oklahoma State to kind of say, no, this is our conference. I remember talking to Mike Gundy at Big 12 Media Days over the offseason, and one of the things that he said, he was asked actually by my colleague, Dennis Dodd, who do you think is the face of the Big 12? And Mike Gundy was like, well, I guess it's me. I've been here longer than anybody. I've been here since 2005. I've won as much as anybody. And frankly, he's right. And so you kind of have the old legacy of the Big 12 with Oklahoma State coming in against this new Pac-12 team that in Utah that came in and has built themselves up to a really high level over the past couple of years. And so this is, I think, a meeting of eras in some way heading into this game. It's kind of, again, a past versus a force that's trying to become the future of this league. Now, I think that to talk about Utah for a second and their transition in, they're unique relative to these other teams because they did not know that they were going to be changing conferences until a year ago. It's very recent that they actually made the decision to do that, as opposed to Oregon, who had been planning for it, as opposed to Texas that had been planning for it. Utah was kind of just thrust in. At the same time, the gap, of course, isn't as big going from the Pac-12 to the Big 12 as it is going from, the Pac-12 to the Big 10 or whatever, just in terms of resource and investment. So I think that Utah is still in really good shape. They've built up their roster. They've actually elevated themselves to being a consistent top 25-ish recruiting operation too, which very few other teams in the Big 12 are there consistently. TCU's been there for stretches. Oklahoma State's been there for stretches, but not with the level of consistency that Utah is at this point. And so I think that this is also an opportunity for Utah to make a statement about their place in the Big 12. There's been a lot of talk this offseason from Utah people about, well, we are poised to be the class of the Big 12 in 2024 and heading forward. This is kind of your first real test to do it.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, to me, it's fascinating to look at those two coaches. For some reason, I always feel like Kyle Whittingham was there a little bit longer than Mike Gundy, and technically he was only because he coached the bowl game after Urban left. But I mean,
right?
It is. I did not realize they both there in their 20th full season as head coaches. That is remarkable. I knew Gundy had been there for a while. I always he shares a birthday with my wife, so I always kind of joke about that. That's how I know Mike. That's how I know when Mike. And also we all remember, at least of a certain vintage, or the meme is there. I'm a man. I'm 40. So I always think he's a man plus whatever year it is, like to kind of solve his own age in my mind is like an equation. But yeah, no, it is remarkable. There's another team that we briefly touched on, but we should talk about, because a lot of folks, especially before the season, we were all having that conversation. Wow, Oregon, of all the additions to the Big Ten, looks like the most ready to just join because of what they've built there over the years. I wouldn't say quietly, but it still feels like a little more under the radar for whatever reason. I mean, we all knew Oregon was good, but then when we looked at them, especially heading into this, both with the players Lanning inherited from Mario Cristobal, but also what Lanning has installed himself, it seemed like they were just going to roll in. We were all circling that October 12th game with Ohio State going into Autzen as like that is the game. That is going to be like the next wave of, at least for the Big Ten, the Ohio State Michigan game of this season. And then the game started to happen. Idaho and Boise State put some concerns in us, but against Oregon State, the game formerly known as the Civil War, very uncivil performance by Oregon, just kind of pushing around the Beavs, who we thought in our previous week, we were like, you know what? They lost some people, yeah, but it looks like, I mean, DJU apparently wasn't a huge loss as Florida State turned out. But now, look at them now. I mean, are the Ducks, do you think they're getting ready? Luckily, again, they have a bye this week, and then they get that classic Big Ten matchup with UCLA in the Rose Bowl next week, the week after. Do we see them in a position where they seem to be getting a footing? I mean, what is the state of Oregon in your mind right now?
Well, I think that you have to look at their offensive line and the issues that they had over the first couple of weeks. They have notably made a position change at center and brought in, swung over a guy. They were starting a walk-on at one point over there, and they were kind of like, we can't afford to have a walk-on at this ultra important position. They move over another starter. And last week, it seems like it helped. Right? Like this was a team that was getting pushed around by Boise State, by Idaho the week before that. I think that it's still a young unit that's still dealing with some injuries. And if I'm one of these other teams, if I'm Ohio State, certainly on October 12th, I am attacking them from every angle possible, trying to confuse them. But I do think
Chip
that
Kelly can do that. Do you think he's capable of doing that? Sorry, no. Actually, that's
well,
a defense.
I don't know.
Hello.
He doesn't know a lot about the Oregon program, from what I understand.
Yeah.
But I think that no, I mean that would be my thing. Is if I'm one of these opponents, I still think that there are advantages to take, but I think you also have to look at like their skill talent is playing at an incredibly high level right now. That was one of the biggest additions that they had over the offseason, was adding a player like Evan Stewart at wide receiver, who really hasn't even exploded to this point, but they have four guys who have at least 150 receiving yards. Dylan Gabriel has been mostly perfect for them when he's not under duress. Jordan James has been really good for them at running back. So I think that this is a team that's starting to come together, that's starting to figure itself out a little bit. But I will say too, they came into the year consensus number 3. Like no doubt about it, they were number 3. They were the top contender to Georgia and Ohio State as a national championship contender. Now, part of them falling is not their fault, because Texas has just risen to that moment in a way that I thought maybe Oregon might. But there's not a huge excuse for, well, why are you falling behind Alabama, right? Why are you falling behind some of these other teams in terms of consistent week-to-week production? You're not going to learn, again, like you mentioned, by this week at UCLA versus Michigan State, we're really not going to learn a whole lot about this team over the next couple of weeks. It's that October 12th game. We're going to figure out, is this team actually Big Ten ready?
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, we were talking again before the before the Oregon State game. Was Oregon going to manage to somehow win their way out of the top 10 because of their performances? And luckily, they performed to the level people expected and kept at a reasonable ranking for in the top 10 for at least for the bye, and they'll probably stay in it. We're assuming, unless I mean I don't even know what would happen to potentially push them out. But again, the only potential loss people circled on the schedule, the regular season schedule for them, is Ohio State. Because when you look at the rest of the schedule, especially now that we've seen how teams like Michigan have played, how teams like Wisconsin have played, and Washington have played, it seems like Oregon should still, even in assuming they're not entirely there, they'll have opportunities to firm up and win. The only problem is that Ohio State game. But we've said that before. They can lose that Ohio State game and still end up in the Big Ten championship game, and presumably whoever loses that game is going to get at large. So it's interesting. Oregon seems still on the path we had consensus among the media presume they would go, but at the same time, a weaker version of it than we had expected. Because we expected Oregon was going to be, the number 3 team. It was going to be just a clash of potential champions, and just like Washington and Oregon in the 2 iterations we saw last season. But now, it is fascinating to see that. Well, When we get back from the break, we're going to talk about a couple of other games, as well as not only new teams in, but a couple of teams that we should also mention because, they're in the battle to stay on the island here on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
Okay, so we've talked about Texas and Utah and Oregon as teams that have moved and are now still powers and really going to show themselves hopefully in these next couple of weeks. But the other game that is, I think, involving probably the surprise team that we're still talking about is potentially not only being on the island because they fought their way on the island, but even being a contender, and that's USC. As I've said many times, I'm an alumnus of the Trojans. I've gone through their highs and lows. I started with the lows, honestly, and then through the highs. I didn't expect them to be quite where they are right now, and I mean that in a charitable way. So here they are heading into Michigan. This was a game a lot of people had circled regardless because Michigan, again, all the reloads that they had, losing obviously Harbaugh, but also 14 guys to the NFL draft, it just seemed like they weren't going to be the same. And Texas certainly put a emphasis that no, they are not the same team as last season. But this Michigan game, again, it's in the big house, so that is a big plus. Not that it's known for being a loud, raucous environment. It's a very staid place, but so is the Coliseum. So they're meant for each other. I'm curious to see where this is going to go. I mean, what are we looking for? Are we looking for USC's ability to stop the run game, or are we just looking to see can USC defeat Michigan? I'm not saying they have to do it like Texas did, but are we looking for USC to benchmark their performance here?
Well, I think that this is a huge opportunity for USC because the reality is when USC decided to join the Big Ten, the thing that people said is that they're not going to be able to handle physicality. And LSU doesn't necessarily provide that specific issue. They're very physical, they're very fast, but Michigan is the team that's going to try to run straight through your face. So I frankly don't know what a Michigan win actually looks like other than maybe hanging on to the ball. They're going to start Alex Orji in this game, so maybe they're literally going to run some single wing and try to just average 3.5 yards per carry and get first downs every 3 plays. But this is a huge opportunity for USC to say, no, we can handle that. We can handle these issues. I think that Michigan is going to be really aggressive trying to shut down the passing game and keep the passing game in front of them. And by the way, when you look back at that Texas-Michigan game, Quinn Ewers' yards per pass attempt and things like that don't look all that impressive, but it's because Michigan forced them to dink and dime down the field. It wasn't necessarily because Texas wasn't able to move the ball. So I think that USC, it's going to have to look a lot like that too. Can they be patient? Can they deal with not having explosive passing plays? Can they deal with not having explosive plays overall? Can they grind out an 11-play touchdown drive and put it into the end zone? The style of this game is going to be, I think, more important than the actual result of this game in a lot of ways. And I mean, look, I'm curious for you, is this a USC team that has fundamentally prepared itself in a certain way, transformed itself, or do you think that maybe things just weren't as bad as maybe they looked at times last year?
That's a great question. So I was thinking, what would I be looking for? I'd be looking for what the rushing yards for Woody Marks are going to be. That's the running back who has been basically carrying the load for USC in the running game. He's the Mississippi State transfer. Who again, this is his first season in Troy, but I'm USC's always had. I mean, I'm going to go back to the '90s, okay, because I'm old. But I remember there was something that was written in the LA Times because there was a guy there, and I forgot his name, and I apologize ahead of time, who used to do his mock version of the top 25. And it was always funny, he'd always have his own. I mean, some of it was a little trite. I mean, how many times can you say per don't? I got it. All right. You made your point. But with USC, he had one sentence that forever stuck with me. And a lot of teams fall into this category. USC, all talent, no results. So USC's always had talent. And that's always been the problem. They can recruit. Maybe they may not be in the top 5, top 10, but they can recruit players. They can recruit dudes if you were that type of person. But the problem is they just never know how to make it work. You get the right coach or you get the right coordinator, and suddenly things can go forward. So I'm wondering, and I'm still hesitant because I'm not entirely a believer in this. And this Michigan game is going to be one of those games that will provide evidence that USC is moving in the right direction. But has the hiring of Denton Lynn and all of those defensive staff put them in a position to take advantage of complementary football, and can't, because the offense certainly could put up points last season, and Caleb Williams maybe got a little into his own head in the sense that he was Superman and he had to make all the plays, like rather than relying on some other things. But obviously there were a lot of flaws. The offensive line wasn't even that good last season necessarily, but against this Michigan team, we're going to get a better sense of, can it be, is it like, because I remember when Pete Carroll was hired, a lot of people were hesitant. That first 2001 season was uneven, but it got better as it went along. And then the 2002 beyond season, suddenly the team took off. And it turns out the talent had been there the whole time. It just didn't know how to get put in the right place. So this is going to be one of those games where we see, is it that Lincoln Riley, who is a good recruiter, has put together talent? The problem was it just wasn't being used to its full extent. And maybe was it relying perhaps a little too heavily on the quarterback that came with him from Oklahoma, Caleb Williams? I'm not in any way like insulting Caleb Williams' talent, not at all. But I mean, when you have that, do you start thinking like, well, Caleb can make it work, rather than, well, okay, how do we really build something around him so that he can be the talent he is without having to completely rely on just magic, which diminishing returns. So I think that's a great point. But yeah, we'll see. I can't wait to see this game in Michigan Stadium. I'm glad it's an afternoon game. It seems perfect, an afternoon game. Why not? Big Ten, perfect time. 11:30 my time. 9:30 Pacific. So that's going to be one of those. Hey, by the way, guys, do remember you did join the Big Ten. Oh, actually, no. Is it 12:30 Pacific or is it 12:30? I'm sorry, it's 3:30. Oh, I'm looking at. I hate when I look at these schedules and it's done the thing. I was waiting for that game. It's
on my network, man. It's on CBS. It's the 2:30 game.
Oh my God, CBS got that one. They got the good game. Oh my goodness,
they got the good game.
Good for CBS. That's why we got those negotiations. That is a prime. I mean, as we remember, the network shifted who was sponsoring what when all the big media deals went up. I mean, good for CBS. That's gonna be a great game.
Yeah, I think that the way that it works, and I want to be clear, like I am not in the weeds with all this
you're
stuff.
Not the,
and I have
no the programming department. You're not making. You're not cutting those checks.
I'm not Mr. CBS. To be clear, I don't control the broadcast network. I do think that there are certain games in certain weeks where CBS gets higher priority than Fox does for their big noon kickoff. But I mean, I gotta say, I think that their big noon kickoff this week is Marshall at Ohio State. Sure, man. I don't know if you say so. Like, I just feel like they probably can.
I just have to ask you one quick question: has anyone ever totally been misunderstanding of CBS Sports and started to get into an argument about why do you guys keep Big Brother and Survivor going as a show? Like, why do we still have that? Young Sheldon is an annoying character, like what, bro?
I've not had full CBS broadcast like network TV questions. No, I definitely have gotten why did you put this game on at this time, and what about this announcer? And I'm just like, I don't know, man. I write for CBSSports.com. That is really not. I don't get to talk to Tony Romo. Like, do you think that we're on the same page? No, we're not.
Oh my gosh, it reminds me of Danny Putty on Larry King in his later years. It's like, Larry, I'm on DuckTales.
I'm on DuckTales. Like, private jets.
Why would I know this? This is above my pay grade, man. The next game we wanted to talk about is the one game they is going to, and it is a legit game. I know I teased a bit the fact that Oklahoma State seemed like at least a more evenly matched game with Utah, and maybe it is because Tennessee's just looked so surprising in these initial weeks. Tennessee at Oklahoma. Obviously, Oklahoma, we've talked about them a lot in the sense that they were the cream of the crop of the Big 12. I mean, Texas, is rising right now, but historically, it's been Oklahoma's conference, and everyone's mostly playing for second place. What do we make of that game? I mean, is this something? And obviously, there's the whole Josh Heupel, homecoming game. I mean, all the stories are there. I do get it. I want to just say game day. I do understand. But what do you make of this game? Is this going to be? I'm skeptical. I think it's a great story, but I think the actual results on the field are going to get ugly.
Well, yeah, like you mentioned, so many storylines with this game because you have Oklahoma, their first game, SEC conference game. It's probably the biggest game on campus in 15 years about. The game that's been coming up a lot for them is Oklahoma Texas Tech back in 2008, which helped get them to the national title game. But like before that, it's I think 2000 Oklahoma Nebraska is the one that people have been saying. So a huge game is the point. Uh and then you have the Josh Heupel factor. For people who don't know, Josh Heupel, the national championship winning quarterback in 2000 at Oklahoma, longtime offensive coordinator, a little bit scapegoated after the 2014 season and pushed out, and very unceremoniously. I don't believe he's been back to Norman since he was fired
Wow.
from Oklahoma in 2014. There are not a lot of good feelings there. By the way, he was fired. Notably, Mike Stoops, the defensive coordinator, not fired after that season. But now, of course, Josh Heupel has a top 7 team coming into Norman. This is also a battle, by the way, of I think two of the top 3 quarterbacks in the class of 2023, in Nico Iamaleava on one sideline and Jackson Arnold on the other. So just so many through lines with these two teams. It's kind of crazy. But like you said, I'm a little worried, man. I'm a little worried about Oklahoma heading into this one. Their offensive line has been a huge issue. They get some players back, including their center Branson Hickman, but I mean, we don't know exactly how healthy he is. We don't know exactly how deep this line is. They have struggled in I mean definitely their last two, but even their Temple game, they had some periods of inconsistency on offense. Against Houston, they frankly should have lost the game. They had to force a late safety to come away with that one. Tulane, they scored some late touchdowns to pull away, but this was a fourth quarter game as well. And now you're playing potential number 1 overall pick James Pierce at defensive end against Tennessee. I'm a little concerned, man. I'm a little concerned. I think this game, and one of the big questions is going to be just how good is this defense? Is it a top 5 unit? Is it a top 30 unit? Because I think the difference between those two things are whether Oklahoma has any chance in this game. Uh, I'm a little worried that it's going to go the direction of Tennessee versus NC State, where it's like it's not like a crazy uncompetitive game, but where it's just the offense just has no chance. Where like the offense just has no chance, and eventually the floodgates break open, and Nico Iamaleava didn't even have to necessarily play well in that game to just bowl them over and ultimately grind them down. I just I don't know. Do you have a little more optimism about Oklahoma, or do you think that this is a Tennessee coming out party?
I think it's a Tennessee coming out party, and I think you're right. I think we'll know basically midway, late in the third quarter where it's going. We're going to start to see Oklahoma wear down and that offense start to take advantage. Not because of anything other than the fact that the defense of Tennessee just keeps them in that game and keeps Oklahoma from moving the ball to the point where Tennessee can just do what they need to do just enough or do just a little bit more, because the other side is completely demoralized. I think Tennessee is one of these surprise teams. They're like USC in a lot of ways, where I did not expect them to necessarily be where they are right now. And that game against NC State certainly proved it in my mind, where this is a legit Tennessee team, and that defense is absolutely better than advertised. I mean, we knew they had great players. We've talked about that, before, but I absolutely agree with you on that. Moving on to some of the other big games. I mean, now we've talked about, again, the teams that are incoming, the ones that have shifted conferences, a lot of those that are highlighted here. We're not going to talk about UCLA, although imagine if UCLA beats LSU in the swamp. Everything, I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I really genuinely don't think that's going to happen. But my goodness, that would absolutely force us to review every team in so many categories. But we're going to assume they're going to lose there. But the team we do want to talk about, there's several games. Actually, we have a good weekday game on Friday. A game I don't think anyone had ever pegged, but whoever wins that game, we're going to be paying more attention to, I think. Not necessarily on the Survivor, not of our Elite 12, but will be one we'll consider later on if they keep winning. Number 24, Illinois at number 22, Nebraska. Who saw that one coming? I mean, Nebraska Okay, Dylan Raiola, I'm not entirely shocked that they're doing well. We actually kind of, when I was looking at their schedule, I thought, Nebraska could actually start rolling before they really get a serious challenge. But Illinois, they're the ones that exposed Kansas before UNLV did. What do we make of this game?
I'm real curious, right? I don't know exactly what to take of Illinois to this point. They have that win against Kansas, but haven't really played anybody else outside of that. I'm a little more of the opinion that Kansas losing to Illinois was Jalen Daniels throwing 3 touchdowns and not necessarily Illinois being crazy good or anything like that. On the other sideline, though, I mean, look, Nebraska has a long, long pathway to actually get into a playoff discussion or in a top 12 discussion. But like, I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility that this is a top 15 team, that they're a team that will have Illinois at home. Like you mentioned, I think that winning that game would potentially push them into the top 20. They're number 22 right now. They've got a long pathway at Purdue, Rutgers, at Indiana. Although that Indiana game,
Yeah,
that's
that's
suddenly
something got
looking
spicy. Yeah.
real. That's gonna be like a fun. Ooh, okay, I'll watch that one. And then to end the year, I mean, that's really when we figure out some stuff about just how good Nebraska can be at Ohio State, at USC, at Iowa in the closing weeks of the season. But I mean, I think that if Nebraska comes out strong and wins this game pretty convincingly, that would be a huge deal. I think in terms of just trying to set them up for a season that they could have. They're 9-point favorites heading into this one. I'm a little surprised that the line is quite so big, but that would be a huge emphatic victory on national television that I think would they introduced themselves certainly against Colorado, but I think this would be a much bigger introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Nebraska. We again. I remember looking at their schedule before the season. I figured Illinois would be an easy one. A little tougher than we expected at Purdue after Notre Dame exposed them. I'm not worried about that game anymore. The Rutgers game is quietly one where I'm like, all right, this is going to actually be the separation Saturday that we didn't expect. Nebraska versus Rutgers could very well be a battle of undefeateds, but yeah, no, I mean, other than that Ohio State game, which kicks off that interesting run where they're going to have, of course, as you said, at USC, Wisconsin, which you never know, and at Iowa. Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm loving this game. I'm expecting Nebraska to still pull it together. I have a lot of faith in Matt Rule. I think they've been able to get that offense in a great direction with Dylan Raiola. I think they will. The Black Shirts are back. While Illinois has had some surprises, I do think you're right. I think that Kansas game can be, especially after we saw the UNLV game, that is just a problem with Daniel throwing picks at this point. Not to denigrate Sluka and all that great offense that UNLV has, but certainly after we saw the game after it, we're like, oh, there might be a commonality between these two. Um, on Saturday there are some interesting games. I know we want to also kind of take a look at Miami and maybe benchmark them against USF. By the way, today, as we're recording this, a little earlier on Wednesday, USF finally released the some pictures, some renders. It was clearly a push across their social media. They're finally, in 30 days from now, going to break ground on that on-campus stadium. I've loved watching that process because it has been going on for 2 years, and it has been like clockwork in the right way. We're proposing it to this. Can we get the right to do an environmental study? Sure. These are the sites we're looking at. Sure. Can we do this? Sure. Like been going through methodically for the last 2 years. And now they're about to break ground in 30 days. Looks like a cool space. I just want to say that. But setting that aside, that's one of the games we're looking at. Can Miami, how can they perform against USF, especially after we saw what Alabama did? And then, I'm going to say there's a trio of ACC games of interest. Now, I'm not saying we have to address all three, but NC State at Clemson. Those are both teams that have taken losses. Clemson kind of seemed to have got their groove back. Maybe Georgia was just that awesome. And Clemson, of course, NC State, of course, lost to Tennessee. That game has got my attention to see how NC State is doing. Again, Grayson McCall's injured, so we're going to have the guy who was substituted in. I forgot his name off the top of my head, but he was able to kind of help NC State win their last game. And then Georgia Tech, they lost to Syracuse. They've got one loss, and of course, they dropped out of the rankings, but they're going to play Louisville. To me, those 3 games in the ACC are real interesting because I'm not sure where to go with this. I'm not sure if the ACC is ever going to have a chance at potentially getting another bid in the college football playoff. But I do think, and I'm trying to remember who I think the best version I've heard of that is if they're going to make it, it's going to take an upset in the ACC title game. It's going to take an undefeated
Sure.
Miami, losing to get that other one. But I think it was who was it? Oh yeah, Greg McElroy is the way I heard it. First heard it phrased that way, and I think that's the only chance. But still, in terms of building up the ACC process, those 3 games have my interest. What do you think?
No, I think that this is a huge prove it weekend in the ACC. Like you said, I mean, heading into the year, NC State was kind of my number 2, right? Like that was a team that I was banging the drum on. Certainly did not look like that quality of team. It really hasn't through any of their first 3 games, frankly. I do think that this is the moment where we start to figure out that Clemson NC State game. It's a 17-point line. If you had told me that a week or 2 ago, I absolutely am smashing that NC State line, but they just haven't showed a whole lot. I think if Clemson comes out and wipes the floor with the Wolfpack, then I am, one, comfortable saying this is clearly the top contender in the ACC to Miami. And 2, look, they're they're gonna have a long pathway back to truly getting back into that large range after what happened against Georgia. But I think the fact that it happened against Georgia will make it a little more forgivable. I mean, I think back to that game in 2022 where Oregon loses to Georgia 49-3 and goes on to win 10 games. I think people will be willing to forgive a little bit if it's just, oh, you got Georgia. Oh well. But I do think that look, so many people have asked me, where's Louisville in all of this, right? Like, why are we getting overlooked and disrespected in the ACC race? And I kind of tell them, well, because people watch the FSU Louisville ACC title game and they're like, this is not a serious program, which is not fair. I want to be clear. That's not fair to Louisville. It was a year 1 staff. It was a one team. They've got a new team now. But I think that if they were to come out and really have a good performance against Georgia Tech, it's a great opportunity for them to force their way into the discussion.
Yeah, Louisville kind of it's just their schedule. I mean, you start with Austin P, you get Jacksonville State. No one's expecting a whole lot out of that. But if they can defeat Georgia Tech, and then, of course, the following week they're at Notre Dame, then they can put themselves in the discussion. It's kind of funny, just as a side note, we were talking about the teams that arrived in their conferences. SMU, man, they landed with a thud, and finally BYU finally put them out of their misery there. Speaking of the Cougars, I just wanted to mention there's a Big 12 game that also I think deserves a little bit of attention. Kansas State, number 13, they proved themselves against Arizona in a separation game last Friday. They're going on the road to the Cougs, and the Cougars are 3-0 quietly. They managed to beat BYU. They managed to beat SMU, and then they had some weaker opponents, and of course, Southern Illinois, an FCS team that was ranked number 10 at the time, and at Wyoming, which is a shambles, which is a remarkable shambles. I can rant about Wyoming, but I will not. What do we make of that game? Is that going to be an opportunity to see, like, can BYU potentially defeat Kansas State? Have we ever really, has that even been on the, because we've all been kind of like, I remember we had one of the guys who was an expert in Utah football come over here, and it's like, look, it is BYU. Kalani Sitake, he's a great guy, but I'm not sure this is going to be the season for them. But really, could they surprise us?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But I mean, but again, like this is, and again, we talked about it a little bit on Tuesday's show, but this is one of the most fun things I think about the new playoff, which is that there's all these subplots going on at the same time that you frankly have to pay attention to. Because if BYU comes out and upsets Kansas State, you all of a sudden got to pay attention to them in a way that you didn't before. It also, by the way, would say something maybe a little less negative about where SMU's at if BYU is actually just that quality of team and is able to go on the road the way they did. It's a fascinating group of games. And again, like this is prove it week to me in college football. ACC teams, which teams are going to be ready to kind of step up and meet the challenge? Big 12 teams, which ones are going to be the ones that are going to step up and contend with Kansas State in the Big 12 race? Big 10, same deal, right? Which team is it going to be? USC? Are they ready for that next spot? Is Michigan going to kind of take it back where their early season struggle is not that big a deal? There's so much going on, and the reality is we're only in week 4. There's still so much ahead.
Absolutely. I cannot wait to see how these games flesh out. And who knows, maybe there's a team we haven't talked about that's going to get upset. It's always out there. I'm hoping we talked about it last week was apparently the first time since 2013 where the favorites in the top 25 all won out. So who knows? The odds are not in the favor of everyone kind of sliding through. I'm not saying, good luck, Warhawks. Maybe it'll be you, ULM, but I doubtful. But who knows? It'll be someone we don't expect. But all of that said, I want to thank all of you who are listening to us and thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show. He's Shehan J. Raja. You can find his work at cbssports.com and at Shehan J. Raja on X and TikTok. I'm Bobak Hyrie, part of the group that runs Reddit CFB. Thanks for listening.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.